Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda. This is Kevin
Hi there.
with A. Smith Gallery, and we have with us today Susan Keiser. Hi, Susan.
Welcome, Susan.
Hi, how are you? And thank you for inviting me.
Sure.
Absolutely.
We're here today to talk about her project, Barbaric Glass, and she received one of our photographic performances. We did Act 2 for 2024. So she's the second one we've done, and we've got 2 more after this to do. So today we're going to talk about this project, which I know is an ongoing project for her. She's been working on it for quite a while. So, Kevin, would you read her bio?
I'm going to read Susan's bio. Susan Keiser's photographic work reflects her long experience in the arts and horticulture. Painter, printmaker, gardener, designer, editor, curator, she has always been concerned with building large structures out of small units, entire worlds out of miniature elements. Situated at the intersection of dreams and memories, abstract and conceptual ideas, her images have been exhibited in solo and group shows in a wide range of galleries, museums, and art fairs both here and abroad, including solo shows at the Grissman Museum of Photography, Greater Boston Stage Company, Stoneham, Massachusetts, Barrett Art Center, Poughkeepsie, New York, Baum Gallery, University of Central Arkansas, Conway, Arkansas, Garage Gallery, Beacon, New York, Anchor Light Gallery, Raleigh, North Carolina, and Catalyst Gallery, Beacon, New York. Group shows include the Berlin Photo Biennale, Keyhole Art Fair, Murcia, Spain, PH21 Gallery, Budapest, the Center for Fine Art Photography, Fort Collins, Colorado, Candela Books and Gallery, Richmond, Virginia, Bead Gallery, SUNY Cortland Fairfield Museum and Historic Center, Fairfield, Connecticut, New York Center for Photographic Art, New York, New York. She attended Pomona College and holds a BFA in painting from the Cooper Union and a diploma from the New York Botanical Garden School of Professional Horticulture. Wow.
Wow.
I'm impressed.
I'm very impressed. Well, would you like to read your statement for us?
Okay. Barbaric Glass. I worked with a family of 4-inch dolls mass-produced in the 1950s, the embodiment of an idealized middle-class culture. Once models of conformity, years of handling have worn away their veneer of polite reserve and privilege, and the contrast between their formal clothing and scarred bodies is both poignant and symbolic. That dichotomy between perfectly curated public lives and private lives filled with anger, confusion, and despair is central to my image making, as it is to understanding not only their era, but increasingly our own. Once the silent keepers of secrets, this doll family reveals the turmoil under carefully constructed facades. Barbaric Glass is one of my ongoing interlocking series of portfolios comprising complex images that address both individual and cultural histories and concerns. Working outdoors, following the seasons, water animates my work as it animates all life. When frozen, it serves as both metaphor and lens. Worn remnants of plastic are transformed when fractured through sheets of ice. Frozen panes that hide, reveal, and distort scenes and narratives the way our memories do, the way our dreams can rewrite the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Intuitive, improvised, my photographs are created in camera, in available light, using real objects. When we were waiting to put this Zoom together, I had some time, and it struck me when I was looking at, I'm going to read my statement, that for all the time and energy we spend on statements, the one thing that actually travels with an image is the title. And in my case, the titles actually have a meaning, and I wanted to kind of refer to that because I think it will be helpful.
Very good.
The title is a quote from a Wallace Stevens poem that I've known and loved forever, called 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. I chose it as a clue or a key as to how my work should be read. 13 numbered stanzas, almost like Zen koans. Is it one long poem or many short poems? Does the order matter? Both these questions one could ask, but the answer is each is its own separate narrative, which together don't tell a story. There's no beginning, no middle, no end. The effect is cumulative. It's an interpretive gestalt, a metaphysics, a treatise on how language and literature work, our relationship with nature, and someone has even proposed a Christian interpretation. They are all right. My work is a series of independent narratives that together convey not an existing story, but let viewers enter a world in which they can find or create their own worldview. And the line that I chose was icicles filled the long window with barbaric glass, which obviously has many meanings, as anything in Wallace Stevens does. First being it's a poem about seasons, and this is the dangers of winter, the coldness of winter, and all of the darkness of winter. It's also about the icicles, which create a lens, create a separate thing through which you see a window, but you're also seeing through the icicles. From the outside, they probably serve a more protective view. So there's always this push-pull in any of these situations. So anyway, that's what I thought might actually be helpful. I did read the line, didn't I?
What's that?
I did read the line, didn't I? I'm sorry.
Yes, I think
Oh, okay.
so. Yeah. So
Okay.
I didn't catch the you said Wallace Stevens, is that what you said?
Yes, it's Wallace Stevens.
And what was the name of the poem?
13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird.
Okay.
And of course, knowing Stevens, it's 13 ways.
Uh-huh.
Because it's not 12 or it's 13, which has this, a significance. It registers in all sorts of weird ways. It can
Right.
take it in many ways.
Right, right. Very good. Well, I'll tell you now, we're going to screen share your images.
There they are.
Can you see that?
Not yet.
I can't see the image. I see Amanda Smith has started screen sharing.
It'll be there in a minute.
There it is. Here we got it. Oh, good. And now I'm small on the side of the screen. I don't have to look at myself anymore.
Okay. Now it wants to get in the way of the. Here we go. Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask a question. We don't typically focus on process, but I think with this body of work, it is because it is integral to it, we will. Could you tell us about your process?
All right, this is actually probably a longer answer than you're anticipating. Most people who look at this work make certain assumptions.
I'm sorry.
What?
It can be as long as you want.
All right, well, cut me off if it gets boring.
Okay.
Most people, when they look at my work, make some assumptions about it. First of all, that the dolls are my dolls that I played with. That these are scenes that I set up, and when I say that they got ice involved, that they're frozen, that they're all preconceived and they're shot like still lifes. So in essence, I have this thing, I set it up in front of a camera in some sort of studio. Many people think these are done in an indoor studio, and then I take a picture of it. My process is actually much more like a street photographer. And I think partly because that's where I started. I think anyone who had a camera, back in the 60s, I got my first camera in when I was 15. I did street photography, and I have never been a professional photographer. So I don't teach. I don't, I've never had a studio practice. I've never had a professional practice. So I basically, come at it kind of with that original perspective, but also grafted onto that, the perspective of a painter. I do my work. I have I just keep sort of finding things I want to do. And it's a very interactive process. This actually, this began not with these dolls at all. This actually began because I'm a chronic insomniac, and I got one of those little Nikon flashy cameras early on, Coolpix. I got a Coolpix camera and was running around taking pictures of the ornaments on my solstice tree, and thought they were really cool. They turned out to be mostly snowmen and clowns. A lot of clowns and Christmas tree ornaments. Interesting fact. And then from there, I went onto eBay, which used to be a really fun place to go when it first started. Before all the commercial enterprises, you could go on eBay and find all sorts of stuff. And I found this series of dolls. and was attracted, as I said in the earlier statement, to that weird contradiction about these relics from the 50s, where everybody was indeed, you always had your public persona, nothing left the house, etc. And here they were battered and bruised, being auctioned off on the internet. There was just something very powerful about that to me. And also because they were so beautifully made. The faces I thought were extraordinary for a machine-made toy. So I started photographing them originally inside, like the ornaments. Then I moved outside, in the snow. I finally just, and the process, my process is literally you take a bunch of pictures, thousands of them. You edit them, you look at them, you figure out what's going on, what worked, what didn't work, and you keep trying over and over and over again. And every time you set something up, you go, okay, I have an idea. I'm going to go try this. That never really works 90% of the time. You have to change your idea on the fly, and then you end up with another whole series of pictures, some of which work, some of which don't. So it's, when I say it's ongoing, it's been ongoing for a long time. And to get to these images has been a very long process. It's a process of trying to figure out, what is it really about these things? A lot of what I'm telling you, I didn't know when I was doing it. This is the other thing I find really funny, this idea that you have to have an idea and then you photograph your idea. I was doing what visually appealed to me. And this is the hardest part, I think, for people to understand, is that you can have left brain and right brain operating at the same time. So with that side of your brain, where you're trying to deal with a lot of really weird technical stuff. I'm photographing a lot with water, snow, things that move, crazy light, natural light. You're doing all these things that are kind of difficult technically, like the woman's heels don't want to stand up, so she's falling over all the time. I would throw them in water and they're floating around and sometimes they sink. It's kind of a crazy thing. And so that's what one side of your brain is doing. Now, that doesn't mean the other side of the brain, that hasn't been applying all along, everything I know about art history, everything I know about the 50s, everything I know about making, my life, everything I know about relations, it's all in there, and it's all the choices that I'm making are influenced by that. They're just, when I'm making the work, I don't really think about that. I let that side kind of like work itself out. And the other thing about them is you never really know what's good. The first time you do an edit, you cherry pick, I cherry pick a bunch of them. I don't know what my hit percentage is, but it's not 100%. I've gone back over and over and realized, out of a sequence of several hundred of a setup, you can narrow it down to 4 or 5. And then among those, at one point you show this one and think that's the best. That's the one that really embodies so much more, that has so much more to say, so much more, packed in there. And then you go back and you go, maybe not, maybe this one. And so it is also over time a question of being responsive both to the work, but also being responsible to the time. One of the things about a long-term project is that it's constantly being affected by current events. One of my other portfolios, which take place in water, the things were floating, and I did a show, and I had so many people. There was that report of the babies being washed up on shore. People were very upset, the immigrants who had been, the boat had capsized or whatever, and they were washing up the thing. And those photographs really had an impact on people because there were some babies in those photographs and they were, floating and whatever. So again, how this body of work manifests in the general public or outside of my little world changes, and it changes, over time, and it will continue to change. As far as a more technical process, it's very experimental. I mean, some of the effects I've gotten are things like I threw a doll in a pond and then it just fell through. I had a little ornamental, pond fountain thing. And then you find it when you empty it, and all sorts of really cool things have happened to it. You know, that's worth photographing. It's like, what's it, Gary Winograd? I photograph things to see what they look like photographed. That's a lot of what's going on with me. It's like I just keep photographing to see what I'm going to get. And
Nice.
within the longer I do this, it's like a street photographer. The better they are, the more like a tuning fork they become. They know when the things are going to, like, you know, all going to coalesce. Oh yeah, I know. I'm going to set myself up here. You know, they get better at that, and I've gotten much better at figuring out what could work or might work. But it's a constant series of surprises. The ice confuses people. These, to be the simple explanation, is they're shot through sheets of ice. The first thing to keep in mind is the scale. These are 4-inch dolls. The sheets, so we're talking this. This is like the little, very small little scale. I like them big. I print them big as possible whenever, to get them out of doll land or whatever. But so the idea that these are actually sort of frozen scenes, people say, oh, I had somebody who wanted me to do that to her artist, where they could put it on the album cover. You know, it's like, no, that would be a sheet that's like this, and he'd have to have dripping on him. I was like, the whole thing. But people say, how did you get the idea for this? I don't know. I at some point I was burying things. I was covering them over. Obviously, I was working outside in the winter, and you know, the difference between putting them under a sheet of ice and then holding up a sheet of ice and realizing this is a lens. This is all sorts of really interesting things are happening when I do this. That was like one of those sort of eureka moments, and then you start trying to figure out how you can actually do that. I have to say, you know, we're in this era where everybody's trying to, let me back up. What the ice does 2 things. On a technical basis, on a technical thing, it distorts, it brings things into focus. It actually creates a second plane of focus. In general, these are all pretty much macro photographs. They're either taken with a macro lens or very close with a telephoto lens. So depth of field tends to be very narrow. What the ice does is create that second plane of focus, which does really interesting things to the photograph. They tend to have a deeper space, as macro photographs do, as large format photographs do. They have a resemblance to large format in that way. And the other thing is the distortion and everything. I find it funny. I look around and everybody's trying to get that distortion. People are putting plastic lenses on their really, you know, unbelievably technically sophisticated Fuji cameras, and they put a cheap plastic lens on it. And you go, what the hell? You know, really? You to get something that distortions or whatever, or you use a Holga, or you use a whatever, or you solarize them. But I mean, there's all these myriad ways people are trying to, you know, they make bad wet plates because you get all the streaky stuff in it. And I got to me, this is a very elegant, you know, ecologically safe, perfectly nice. I don't have to deal with chemicals. You know, it's just as I said, a very elegant solution to introducing a kind of process component, and also that the ice itself. I'm running on a lot. Is this?
No, keep going. You're good.
All right, all right. The thing about the way memory works is that people have an idea that it's like a bookshelf, and you pull a memory off the shelf and remember things, and it's not at all. I mean, the recent advances in you know, imaging, a memory comes from multiple places in the brain, and it's reassembled every time you try to remember something. So it's like a game of telephone. every time you remember something, you change it just a little bit. It's this constant change. It gets added, it gets subtracted. If you don't remember something, it kind of goes into a memory dump somewhere. And, you know, it can be brought back, but probably, you know, but it would take an extraordinary circumstance to bring it back. It's really kind of a whole interesting thing about how we actually see memories, think about things, and also dreams. The thing about dreams is they also are constructed, and they're constructed in a very similar way to memories from different parts of the brain. So this idea that all dreams are very misty and dreamlike and dreamy is, again, kind of just a trope that we've accepted. Dreams, I don't know about you, but dreams tend to have focus. They tend to be very highly focused at times. They can be very misty. Parts of them can be misty, but some can be very focused, very clear. Your mind's eye works like your biological eye. Your biological eye has a central point of focus, and then the mind fills in everything around it and puts it into focus. So when you walk down the street, you're not, you know, you think everything is sharp. It's not, just that focused in the middle. And your dreams kind of work that, your mind's eye works that way too. It fills in and it sharpens things or not, depending on your need. So the ice, when I say it's a metaphorical, way back in the thing, it's both metaphorical and lens. That's the metaphor. It's a metaphor for actually how our brain works, our memory works, our dreams work. It's a metaphor for literally how all of those, not fantasy elements, but all of those outside extra real elements kind of work. That's a lot.
That's great.
You look
That was wonderful. Can I make some observations here?
Yes, please do.
So, and take this the right way. You,
You should never introduce yourself as
I think maybe you're Edward Hopper's evil twin. These are so wonderful in the sense that they all have you know, they're like there's like domestic angst, like in this one right here, you know, and they've got kind of a wonderful creepy nature to them, and they're haunting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So could you speak to that a little bit?
To the fact that they're creepy and haunting?
Yeah, I mean that way. So
Or being the evil twin.
obviously you did that on purpose, right? I mean that.
Yes, yes. I will say this: one's life gives oneself one's vocabulary.
Right.
So one can make certain. I mean, did I come from a bucolically happy family where we all whatever? No. So my worldview does tend to be rather bleak. I mean, it's just, I'm not even sure what it tends to be. I'm comfortable in this bleakness. I understand it. I'm perfectly comfortable dealing with it. I just think some people are, you know, their life experience, whatever, and combined with who they are and genetics, whatever. And it's a world I'm comfortable in. I mean, it's like some people write horror movies, I guess. I don't know. Am I very aware of what all is in here? Yes. Are they highly charged? Yes. Do I tend them to be? Yes. Do I sometimes think maybe they've gone too far? I have edited out things that I thought, I want them to be on that edge. I don't want them to be obvious. I don't want that, what you're calling the creepiness of them, to get into horror movie creepy, or, you know, truly, I don't know what the right word is, but it's one of those things that the editing, this is what I'm saying, the editing is incredibly intense and very, very much concerned. I'm very much concerned with a lot of sort of factors in it. And as I said, I will push the envelope and that envelope pretty far, but no further. I want them to suggest things as much as anything else.
They're wonderful. I mean,
Does that answer your question at all? I'm not sure.
Absolutely. I mean, it's and a lot of it's the simplicity of what you've done that to me is so powerful. Like this one, pretty banal up to this point. And then all of a sudden there's this chair laying on the ground, right? So obviously something's gone wrong somehow.
Exactly. And this is, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is one of those images. I love this images. I think this is a really good one. This is one of my favorites. There are two others in this series, which are more obvious. And I like them, but not as much as this one. And the problem is something like this does not show up well small. So when you put this on an iPhone, reading this image is much more difficult than something that would be simpler and where the emotional impact is more straightforward. So that's something that I think all of us now, fight with, is how our work is being seen. You submit this to a competition and they go right over it, because it takes a minute to actually understand what's going on in this image.
Exactly. Well, and I think that's the case with a number of the.
As I say, when I edit, I really tried to build in as much as possible. And there's also
this one right here. This image is loaded, but you have to stop for a second and ponder it.
Yeah, I like this one too. I'm also extremely careful about the compositions of these things. I mean, again, I think we've kind of gotten used to like sort of a casual sense of imagery because so much of it, is on our Instagram or whatever. And a lot of casual stuff passes muster because you see it for a tenth of a second and you just flip on through and you go, oh yes, I know he's doing this and they're that, I know that.
Right.
But I spend a lot of time both in setting, when in the capture, I hate that word, but okay, in the capture, but also in editing which images, which frames I pick. In all of the technical details in terms of composition and light and color and all of those things I consider very carefully. The other thing about a lot of these things is there's built in certain other like discussions going on. I mean, dolls is the discussion one should have. When I first started this, I felt obligated to defend working with dolls because it was feminine and childish and people made assumptions. And so I had this whole thing about how dolls are possessed. They're these possessions of children but also of shamans and religious figures. And our first sculptures were dolls. And the Venus of Willendorf. This is true. I was going on the way to a portfolio review and this was an article about the Venus of Willendorf. And I'd always thought it was big. I don't know whether you know this piece. It's the big, very voluptuous, back in the Stone Age thing,
Right.
probably one of the first carvings, right? It's
Well,
I assumed it was what?
Almost all early cultures had a Venus figure of some form or fashion because they were
Right.
for
Right.
children.
This is one of those. This is one of the most famous ones. It's the Venus of and it turns out she's 4 inches high, which is exactly the height of the mother doll in my series. And so I had a slide in my presentation, like trying to justify the use of dolls. Now, since Barbie, dolls are cool.
Yeah.
I don't really have to work. I don't have to like talk about, the history of dolls. We used to give them to kids. We used to give the shamans use them. We didn't distinguish which were being used. They all used the same dolls. They're very powerful. They've always been a very powerful part of culture, which is worth saying. But the other thing the other themes running through these are clowns. And I had forgotten about how popular clowns were as holiday ornaments. So they go back way back. And actually, I will tell you one personal story. We used to go to the circus every year, Ringling Brothers. We even went to the Russian circus one year. So looking back, that was not, people generally did not necessarily take their kids to the circus every year. I mean, whatever. But it turned out that my great aunt, who lived in Baraboo, Wisconsin, which was the winter home of Ringling Brothers, had gotten into a very bad situation with one of her male relatives and literally ran away to join the circus, joined Ringling Feathers. Her name was Edith, and she became Dixie and a flyer for Ringling Brothers.
Wow.
So the my connection to circuses and clowns and the whole thing, when I found that, I was like, wow, this is so cool. But anyway, the clowns are another thing like dolls, incredibly powerful. They were the court jesters was probably the second most powerful person in a medieval court. They could say anything. Think of contemporary comics, comedians, how powerful they have been culturally. Think about how humor, when things get really bad, which is the whole thing about being a comic, is what do? You laugh. I mean, it is the, default for, I can't, this is just so bad. What can you do but just start laughing at it? Just on a basic thing. I mean, what do you think of it? Clowns have a uniform. Clowns wear lots of makeup. They have crazy hair. One of the methods of clowning, if you think of like, I can't think of his name, the sad sack clown, maybe it'll come to me. But one of the major forms of clowning is to be oppressed and attacked. And then you get people on your side that way. You get them to sympathize with you. And then once they're sympathizing with you, then you have them in your power and you start manipulating them. I mean, I could go on, but it's, it's very interesting how we're in this era. So the theme of clowns and masks, obviously, both of COVID, but masks now are in these pictures in many ways. Do you want to talk about some of the individual ones, or I don't know how, I've been talking a lot.
There was one, which one is it? Oh, must be the other direction.
Start from the beginning. And you at one point questioned that they were sequenced.
There we go.
And all right, I start with this one because it's kind of the simplest one about the ice. You kind of get the idea. Those are air bubbles, and it seemed like it's a very dense sort of emotional kind of thing. I mean, there's all sorts of things going on, but the ice is pretty straightforward. But keep going. Here you start to see what the ice can do, like in that second one, but also in here, where it illuminates certain things, it hides certain things. I mean, the face of the father in this, all of the three of these faces, when you actually see the dolls straightforward, and you look at these, I mean, any sort of emotion, any sort of comes out of the use of the ice.
Right.
These two, I think at one point, now this is the interesting thing, like these two, when I'm editing these, there's always sometimes little sequences. Each one is an individual narrative, but then some sort of fall into a narrative. And for these two, I kept going back and forth as to which one came first. There is a little story here, and it's really hard to avoid. It's like, was she awake, and then when the sun came in, she pretended to be asleep? Or did it work in the reverse? And then I've actually tried flipping the one with the little boy, like flipping this one. And if you flip that one, then him looking at the phone becomes very prominent. And I thought that's really interesting too. I don't
Right.
know. And that's what I'm saying, is like working with these images, the idea that you have like you're 20, you got your 20, you got your portfolio, and then you move on. I mean, it's just crazy. It's like, I don't know. I may, change this, I may not. And many of the others also have that sort of quality. There's other ones. This is a miracle. Like this, I'm pointing at things that are screen. This is crazy. I know, I keep forgetting. That reflection coming out of that big rabbit. I mean, that's a reflection on the surface of the ice that you go, how did that ever happen?
It's a
I mean,
wonderful.
the ice, and this one you should see, in the upper corner, the upper right-hand corner, those are my fingers. So you get a sense of the scale of this.
Right there. Yeah, yeah.
Those are
Wow.
my fingers. So this is how tiny this all is.
Wow.
And I'm manipulating the ice while in front of this thing that I've set up, and my other hand has got a cable release. This is how these are done. And constantly moving the ice a little bit there, it's the slightest little changes everything on the surface. And everything's melting. And half the time they're falling over. If you hit like her foot, she's very close to the surface of the ice. Now, if I move the ice a little bit back, she'll fall over backwards. Could be interesting. It was actually, I had one of these, it's like, but this is what happens. This is and then sometimes when you look at, you kind of open up the files, you go, wow, how did that happen? That's very cool. But again, I mean, the whole thing is sort of this one I put in there. Go back to the thing with the roses. All right, so roses are another. Clowns are this weird combination of in the 50s, they decided clowns were for kids, and they're on the insides of the houses. Oh, I forgot to point this out. That sequence shows the clown inside the house on the wall behind the sleeping girl.
Nice.
And in the next one, it's in the room because clowns are now in the room with us.
Well, there's a number of clown horror movies also.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like clowns. The other kind of really fascinating, cultural thing is roses. You go, all right, they're really beautiful, but they've got thorns. It's the same thing where you have well-dressed dolls that are all abused. This push-pull, this like yin yang. You've got roses, which they're the symbol of everything. And you think of all a rose is a rose is a rose, a rose by any other name. Valentine's Day roses, the Rose Parade. They're just one of those things, and yet they have thorns. You give them to someone, and if you haven't thought to strip them off, you bleed. It's a common motif in decorators. Anyway, so this is like, a lot of what's going on here is just multiple manifestations of roses. It's in the fabric, it's in the actual roses, it's in the wallpaper, the curtain in the back. Those aren't roses, they just happen to appear like roses. What was not just a Sleeping Beauty? What was that? Didn't she have a thorny?
She got pricked by the rose. Yeah.
Right. So, we have the image of death, and we have, this is what I keep finding stuff in this work. I mean, you work intuitively. You can't plan this stuff, I guess. You just can't. Like this one, go back to that one for a second. This one, I just thought of something about it the other day, and this doll is broken. That the part of her body below the chest is like, you can see there's a hole and everything. And it just dawned on me how, God, this is so much. If you want to talk about losing control of women's rights,
right.
What's going on politically with, women dying from the inability to get abortions, women not being able to control their bodies, women, it's like, this is in many ways very metaphorical. This is, if I had to think of an image that wasn't really obvious, to have like some skeletons, a woman, the face is a mask that's coming off. You know, one could see that as a metaphor for death, obviously, and her bottom of her body has just been destroyed. You go, this is interesting. Now, did I think of that when I made this? Absolutely not.
So that wasn't intentional then.
No, that's what I'm saying. And I guess that's my point in a lot of this conversation is we have so much emphasis now on us. You have to write your statement. Your statement, you have an idea. Then you have to like execute your idea. And then you have to tell us how you did it. And there's this process that, you know, works for some people, but I think it can be limiting. It doesn't allow for that ongoing dialogue between you and your work, between viewers and your work, between your work and what's happening in the culture, between all of those things that bear on the images that you're producing. It limits you to, I think a lot about how so many projects I see look like they were treatise, you know, a treatment for a movie. And the highly conceptual things tend to end up too much often. They can. I have to be clear here. I'm talking about my process. I mean, people can make really wonderful, successful, great work doing any way they want to do it. But for me to have, I can't imagine trying to like work that way. Because for me, that would just be an illustration or a proof of concept. You know, you put too much emphasis on the words, the story, and you disturb the balance between what is commentary on a body of work and what is a necessary thing to understanding the work. And those are very different things. If the work needs to stand at least somewhat on its own. It has to be open. If it's going to actually last, if it's going to be more than sort of, okay, this is a magazine article, it's got to have more than just that. Because if you put too much emphasis on the written part of it, then you're going to get judged on the quality of the writing, which is usually pretty bad. You're going to get judged on the nature of the story. I mean, a lot of people's stories just aren't terribly interesting. You know, in the scheme of things, one person's trauma is not terribly impressive given, you know, the scale of 1 to 10 in trauma. I'm, God, this is where I'm gonna get myself in trouble, but what you choose to do is if it's too conscribed by, you know, your prior assumptions, your prior intentions, you automatically start out limiting yourself and limiting your work and limiting the long-term effect that it can have and the long-term life it can have, I think. It becomes very much of its time and of its moment. Which all art should be, but it shouldn't be limited to that, I guess is what I'm saying. Does this make any sense to you, by the way?
Yeah. I mean, if I may be wrong about this, but so much of what you're talking about is working, you know, intuitively and with your subconscious, allowing your subconscious to play in the work, which is not always clear to the maker at the time that they're making, and kind of evolves over time. Is that correct or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing about these is I'm very careful about what miniatures come, you go online and miniatures are like, you can, thousands, millions, different kinds, and they fall into several categories. You have the vintage miniatures, you have the contemporary ones, you have the mass-produced ones, the, you know, junky ones, and then you have the OOAK, one of a kind. And the temptation is to, like, you see all of these one of a kind things and they're wonderful, but they're not only expensive, but that's borrowed interest to me. That's like sort of trading on someone else's artwork. I tend to go for the mass-produced things, the vintage things, because I do want to work in a certain period. And the things that a lot of times people can't figure out why I ever bought it online, like, I can't believe you bought that piece of garbage. The clown, that's a real clown behind the ice in this one behind the father. And
Right.
that's just a piece of crap from God knows when. That was like, these legs are all half chewed off, but it's a really cool thing to photograph. And so that's what I look for. And I try to understand exactly what it is, the history behind what it is I'm photographing. And so that if someone else sees something and knows something, the image is prepared for that. I was in a poetry workshop once, and this person had a picture of a naked woman in a tub. And the odds of this are astronomical, but I happened to recognize it as a picture of Amy Arbus, who had done a sequence of images that related to her mother's suicide. And I looked at this thing going, and to him it was a naked woman in a tub. And I just thought to myself, that shouldn't be happening. There are other naked women in the tub. You didn't have to use that image. And I think that that's kind of, I don't know. What do you think?
Wow. I don't know that I have an answer for that one. What's interesting is there's so many contradictions in art in general, because all artists are coming to their art from a different place.
Yeah.
Well, you said something earlier about Gary Winogrand. What did he say?
I photograph things to see what they look like photographed.
Right. And when I'm talking to photographers, sometimes I use a Gary Winogrand quote, which is one of the things he used to tell his students was, when you go out to shoot, go out and shoot with a strategy. Well, that absolutely contradicts what that statement that you just said a minute ago. And that's kind of the state of the art world. I think, in my opinion, if you're a true artist, you're existing on all these different planes. I mean, you're not one thing, and you don't attack art in one direction. It's coming from all directions. So,
Well, the thing about the Winograd thing, you have to start somewhere.
right.
So
I like both of those statements. I think both those statements are good. I'm not criticizing that. I just think that's an interesting comparison there. Did that make any sense?
no, that makes absolute sense. And I didn't mean to say that I just like go out there and do nothing. You start with, I set up a little scene and then I try to, I just start somewhere, which is the way I interpret that is that you have to go out there starting with somewhere.
Right.
But where it goes from there. This I threw in because I didn't want people to think I didn't have a sense of humor.
I love it.
And that mask is actually one of the few things that is a handmade, really wonderful little miniature that I couldn't resist. Because I just thought, man, I gotta have that. But that's the quality of stuff that you can buy. And sure, I could load up these pictures with a lot of really beautiful handmade things. And then what have I got,
Right.
which is other people's work. But I allowed myself that.
Well, do you mind if I ask you one more question?
Please do. I'm going to ask you questions. I want to get it. I don't know. Why did you pick this work? Oh, by the way, this is another one of those really cool things that just happened. The thing with the panther, that light thing, the one before here.
That one?
Yeah. You can't make that up. Anyway, why did you pick this work?
I think because visually we like it very much, right?
Yeah.
Just on that. But
well, we've been watching your work for years.
right. But it's so loaded.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. It's not simplistic type work. There's so much here. It's almost like to me, it's like a lot of this is myth in some form or fashion. It's either coming from myth, or it's creating myth, or it's addressing myth, or there's a lot of that going on, in my opinion. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. And definitely true.
And something else that fascinates me about this is you can cut up the images, right? There's, for example, this one, you could cut the clowns out on the right,
Mm.
and you got something cool right there. You could cut this out right here, and you got something cool there. I mean, there's so much going on in these images, but at the same time, it completely changes the meaning of the images, which I guess would be true with any photograph. But there's so much visual interest that this is cool right here, just in and of itself. Does that?
There's a story behind those little dolls.
I mean,
Those
right?
little
Like
dolls
you
were-
you
what?
can put this right down the middle, and you got these two.
Yeah.
There's two interesting images. So they're visually complex, and they definitely draw you in. And I think, to me, it's I see there's a lot of domestic angst, which I can relate to from my childhood, and so I'm being tickled by that as I look at them. Yeah. And then they're also metaphors, right?
They're what?
Metaphors. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree with everything you said. Good, they're doing their job.
Well, I mean, you've got the semi-horror stuff going on with the purely decorative too, depending on where what you're looking at any moment, which is interesting.
Well, the goal is to actually make them pretty and draw you in before you realize they're really creepy.
Right. Well, how about this? Could you tell us how your experience with horticulture has influenced your work?
Yeah, it's first of all, I work outdoors. I mean, the idea of working in a studio makes no sense to me at all. I did that, I think, briefly when I was in art school. I did, I don't know, an assignment in a studio, and it was just like not me. So working outdoors is obviously part of my DNA. Working with natural things. I mean, all of these, the ice obviously is a natural thing. So my thing about roses, the other portfolios have more of them. The Last Wave By is all about, leaves and flowers that have been, that mask faces, and has a lot more of the natural elements in it. Not so much in this series. But there's a constant, when I can work is determined by the seasons, which I also find is part of just who I am. Don't you have a background in horticulture or something?
I was a landscape designer and contractor for years.
Right, all right, so how you get, like you're a weather vane for one thing. You constantly are into like what's happening with the weather. Did we get rain? Did we not get rain? Things are always going wrong. You get used to the fact that, oh, we're going to do this job. But when we dug the hole, oh, it's a perched water table. We have to like completely change the soil. We can't plant that there. It's all rocks. I mean, the constant, it always seems pretty straightforward from the outside, but it's not.
No.
The process, like to me, the process of setting up a large format camera is boring. I can't imagine doing that as a long-term thing. On the other hand, I can do a lot of horticultural process, like, that people would find. It's just kind of how your mind works. You know, to me, weeding is a spiritual thing. No, not really, but you know, weeding is one of those weird processes where you could do it on an automatic basis, and then you get to talking to someone and you realize you pulled out a good plan. You know, you kind of have to, in a lot of things, you have to have the right to make a process work for you. It has to have the right balance between attention and being able to go with the flow. And so when I was a painter, one of the reasons I stopped painting was it was too anxiety provoking. I was like an expressionist painter. So you didn't know whether you just ruined the whole thing or you were making it better. It was the paralysis that would come over me sometimes about it. I find this work a lot more like weeding. It's got the right balance between being very careful, having one part of my brain really active and the other, you know, it's a process that works for me. And that's a very similar process to doing things, you know, in gardening and doing things, you know, creating things in gardens.
That the comment you made earlier about what did you say about you go to plan a plan and you don't know what, you know, you hit the water table or there's rock, et cetera, et cetera. That's interesting to me because I can relate that back to painting because I'm actually more of a painter than I am a photographer. Right. And that's kind of that's part of unless you're a super realist painter where things are what they are, when you're in the process of, you know, that's another thing I want to ask you about. When you're in the process of painting, at least for me, you're constantly reacting to mark, line, and color, et cetera. And when you put down a color, which causes you to react, and put down another color, you put down a mark, and that causes you to react and put down another mark. So you don't really have that luxury here in the sense that you've set these up and whatever happens, happens, right?
But that's not really true because you don't, all right. You don't have the luxury. Well, it depends on how you paint, but if you're painting very gesturally, you have only so much control. But here, you know, as you move the ice and things are happening in front of you and you're taking pictures, the control you have is a lot more in the editing. And to me, like when you're painting and when I was painting and you do this and then you cross it out, you paint over it, you paint into it, you
Right.
you go, "Wah," you know, you've lost it. Here, you have multiple choices and you can go back and re-choose. You know what I'm saying? And I think that produces less anxiety to me. It's a very similar process. Like a lot of these, when I'm making, going, I need a little red thing over there. It's sort of funny when you're talking about that. I need a vertical element. I needed this. I needed that. And that's what I'm saying about it being very improvisational. I end up with a pile of things next to me as I'm trying to figure this out. I'll throw this in there. I'll try this. I'll move the ice this way. I need a new piece of ice. Every piece of ice is unique. You know, you have to find one that works that day. The portraits were in ways sort of a vocabulary of ice, but what makes it less anxious for me is that doing something, putting that like vertical in, doesn't mean I lost the version without it. So when I look, it makes editing infinitely harder. I have to say, the editing can drive you absolutely insane because you're looking at little infinite, you know, changes in an expression, changes oh, I made a little this and that. And sometimes you've left yourself so many choices, finding your way through it is incredibly difficult. But it just, in a weird way, it just changes the emphasis. That's what I was saying, like it's a sort of your personal, well, what keeps your brain going in a productive way? You know, I think every kind of art form has ways of stopping you, you know, where you can, like, you lose the flow. And if you lose the flow, you stop wanting to do it because it's not that art should be fun, but at least can't be so paralyzing that you won't go in the studio.
Right.
You know, it's got to have, you know, it's this balance between a challenge, being challenging at the same time, not totally, you know, paralyzing. So, you know, people work very differently. For some people, obviously, you know, I mean, I think of de Kooning. De Kooning's paintings are so heavy because he kept changing his mind so many times. Some of those paintings weigh like hundreds of pounds. They can barely move them because they have so many layers that he kept working into and into. And he kept thinking, wow, I wonder if you took like, you know, over how many paintings were in there and how many, were they better, were they worse? I don't know.
Right.
At each
He's
stage.
a fascinating character to me because he could make 2 marks on a piece of paper and you knew who made it.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, some of these artists, I don't know how they dealt with some of that, just got to start all over. Yeah, oh my God.
Yeah.
And then you do. And you know, it's just, um, I don't know. I think when you've been as tied to the seasons as I have for as many years, in terms of you just sort of have that, it's kind of has to work its way in there somehow.
Well, you probably get somewhat in the zone while you're creating these also, right? I mean,
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
and it's fun. This is the thing too. This is what's really funny. It's like, you know, people always assume that if you're dealing with like creepy or negative or sad material, that you're sad when you're doing it. You know, when you talk to the public, they have very odd ideas. This can be really funny, you know. I mean, part of when I was doing things in the little pond, you know, in one hand, my left hand, I would have this incredibly expensive camera. And then I'm like moving stuff in the water and then constantly trying to remind myself, don't put the camera in the water. And it's this weird thing going, you're like playing around over here and you're going, whoops, no, hold that camera. You can't put, you know, it's this weird dance in a funny way. It becomes this, it's very interactive. And then,
Right.
you know, punctuated by the ice fall. And you hear this crash and go, no matter how good it was working, it's over. That was my best ice of the day. It's gone. You know, you go, what else have I got? Maybe I could do something with this. I don't know.
Right.
Depending on when it's frozen, it has a very different character.
Well, I think we're going to need to wrap it up. This has
I
been
didn't let you talk very much. Talk. You need to
no,
talk.
we want you to talk.
Yeah, this
We're tired of listening to ourselves. This has been really wonderful. The work is fabulous. Your ability to explain it is amazing. Have you written the book?
No, you know, that's a really interesting thing because people have asked whether I have a book and I haven't. I was in publishing for a number of years. And so I haven't figured out how this becomes a book, other than just a collection of photographs, which I don't necessarily want to do.
Well, I think you could take the transcript from this talk we've had, and there you go. You
good
got it.
start.
Well, thank you. I'm glad, you know, I was really worried about this. I'm very nervous, as you might have guessed, and I tend to run on at the mouth, and I'm glad that it made sense to you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to stop the share.
Okay.
All right.
Big again.
Big again. Susan, that was wonderful. That was
Yeah.
really, really good.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for including me. I do have to say that your gallery has, for years, has always been just one of the bright oases. And when having a physical gallery became impossible to, you know, for so many reasons, I was so glad that you actually continued to do that and provide artists with opportunities. It's, you know, easy to like just abandon all hope and but I'm glad. I was really happy that you were pursuing this and continue to do it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's all because of her. I just work here. She does. She's the.
I figured that out.
behind
I
all
can
of
tell.
it. All right. Well, thanks again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We really,
I
really
hope we'll have a chance to talk again sometime.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
I hope so.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.